kids, you can head on down. As they're herded downstairs, I invite you to grab a Bible, and we will be in Matthew 6. And we're going to be in verse 19, and if you're thinking, aha, he skipped a section, sort of. I did because we had been studying that. We studied that within the spiritual disciplines section, and so we are going to move on to verse 19. And so this is Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and so follow along as I read this, and then follow along. Make sure my desire is not to mislead anybody, but let's look at this together, starting in verse 19. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there is your heart. The eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Verse 24. No one can serve two masters, for he will either hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. And so we're in the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus has already talked about all this heavy stuff. All this heavy stuff about hardships and persecution, and he's hit on anger and bitterness and hatred and lust and adultery, and now he's going to get to money. And so before he gets to the narrative part, he's going to say, hey, disciples, hey, church, we need to talk about your money. We need to talk about your possessions. We need to talk about your credit card statements. We need to talk about your checkbook. We need to talk about what you own and what you do not own and why you own it and why you do not own it. We need to talk about those things. If you're going to follow me, we've got to have a discussion on money. And so before we get to, he traveled from here to there and did this healing and did that healing, Jesus is going to talk to his disciples about money. About money. And it is really intimate. To talk about one another's money is really intimate. So if I sent out a one call and I said, look, today we're going to talk about money and your possessions. I want you to bring your last credit card statement in, and I'll be reading it in front of the church. You thought masks were an issue. Look, I mean, it's like going through your underwear drawer, right? It's super intimate. Like, what? Don't be looking through that. What? And yet Jesus is going to hit on it, and so are we. So we want to talk about where money roots, where money leads, and then finally what money demands. So we're going to just follow the money. We're going to follow the money to where it roots, where it leads, and then finally what it demands. And so let's look at that. Don't store up or lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. That is a command. Don't do that. Stay away from that. Don't do that now. And so what Jesus is getting to, the climax of this idea of treasure and heart, is that I think money and possessions. He hits on that at the end. And you certainly could talk about treasures on earth being something other than money, but most of the time it's money or possessions. And so when I talk and I use the word money, please understand that I'm also referring to what you own and what you don't and what you want. The whole thing. It doesn't take very many murder mystery stories, whether in books or on TV, to notice, hey, almost every one of these is about either money or sex. Every one of these mysteries and why he did it and why she did it, and it has something to do, and it has everything to do with treasure. And so what Jesus is saying here is that if we can follow the money, we can find where your heart is. If we can follow the money, it's like Instagramming your heart. Like, here, look at the map of my heart. Look, follow the breadcrumbs and you'll find my heart. Follow my credit card statement. Let's look at why I'm in debt, and you're going to be able to find my treasure. Let's look at Amazon, and let's look at your latest purchases, and we'll be able to find your treasure. One man's junk is another man's. It's treasure. And so what Jesus is assuming is not whether or not you have a treasure, it's you do. Everybody has a treasure. Everybody has something that gets them excited, that gets them through, that gets them peace, that gives them identity and value. That if that thing were taken away, you would have no idea how to function. If you weren't able to have this, if you weren't able to buy this, if you weren't able to go here, you would have no idea really how to function. If you couldn't save for retirement, if it was a bad economy and you couldn't put you would think, oh, what are we going to do? I don't know. And that's why the next part of this, if you look at the very next part of verse 25, what we're going to talk about next week, is about anxiety. There's a connection here. Money and anxiety. What causes the most stress in marriage? When we were first, Mindy and I were first being counseled for marriage, one of the first things that our counselor said, okay, who's the spender and who's the saver? Because there's going to be issues. So any guess who's the spender in our family? Who's the saver? Probably, if you know anything about us, you already know the answer to that. So during the whole COVID quarantine thing, how did you find rest and peace? And how did you find just that breath? You're like, oh, okay, I think I can make it through. I mean, did Amazon get a bump? I mean, look at my Amazon account. Like, that was one of the things that brought me excitement during quarantine. It's like, because you can buy anything. I can scroll through and you can get like a light-up toilet seat. And it's only like $5. You think I'm kidding? I'm going to leave it, whether I bother or not. But if you follow the money, you're going to get to your treasures. If you follow the possessions, you're going to get to what you treasure. It's not if, it's that you treasure. You all treasure something. We all are a bunch of people who treasure something, and the treasure will grow roots into your heart and begin to grow and bear fruit, and we call those habits. And you begin to develop a lifestyle out of your treasure. How do I secure it? How do I make sure it's okay? How do I get more? How do I upgrade it? And your life, and whether you take this job or that job, and what you teach your kids and don't teach your kids about money, is all because your treasure in your heart has taken deep, deep roots. What's a heart? We often, and I think wrongly we talk about Jesus wants your heart, and I think we mean well, and what's behind it is good. But the idea of heart, Jesus doesn't want your heart, man. What we're talking about heart here is when Jesus says heart, he means everything. Because the heart is who you are. It's your affections. It's what you love. It's what you go after. It's why you decide to do this and not that. It's why you go here and not there. It's why you say this. It's why you work for this. That's the heart. So when he talks about the heart, he's talking about all of you. You think a cockpit of an airplane. The heart is the cockpit of an airplane. Right? You want the wing to work, but if the cockpit doesn't work and get off the ground, it doesn't matter if the wing, you want the whole airplane to work. Jesus, when he talks about the heart, talks about your emotions, talks about your affections, what you love. And so when you follow the money, you realize that money can buy idols. And we know all the songs, man. Money can't buy me love, right? We know those songs. And I don't know that we really believe them. And they have a good tune, and we're glad to sing along with them. But money can buy our idols. Money can buy power. Money can buy power. It can buy influence and recognition. Can it? You can see this in the church. And well, you know what? I actually have been at this church longer, and I give more than that family, so I should have a say or not on whether money can buy power. You can be, in a sense, you can be generous with your money and yet reveal your treasure just as money. Because you're using your money to buy idols, even in church world. Money can buy control. Money can buy the idol of control. That you can use your money to buy the idol of control and make sure everything goes your way. Make sure you can manipulate things, that it will go to your schedule, to your agenda, and how you want things to work out. Anybody ever use money that way? And then you can buy comfort and pleasure with money. You know that. Light up toilet seat. Right? You know you can buy comfort and pleasure. You know you can even save for that. You can buy that idol. You can buy approval, applause, recognition of people. Right? Especially if you have parent issues. Daddy, I just want my dad to be proud of me. I just want my mom to be proud of me. And so here it is, as we look at this idea of treasures digging deep into your heart. Where is your treasure? Because that's where your heart is. And what is your heart love? Are you sure? Are you sure? And Jesus, this is a command, and this is because Jesus is truth. But don't you think it's for your good too? Don't you think it's for the good of your family that Jesus says, look, moth, come in and take away your possessions. Rust, it could be mildew. Those things are going to break down what you buy, and even thieves can come in and steal. So during this time, it's not like this now, thank God. During this time, clothing and what you wore marked how important you were. That was sarcasm, by the way. So if during this time, if you wore Reebok instead of Nike, you weren't as important. But clothes, if you read up, clothes were way more expensive back then than what they are now. They weren't as readily available, and so you would save up, and you would want, if I could just get this, you would buy your idol of power and control and human approval. And if you got the really nice stuff from the Silk Road coming in, you could get, I have no idea about that, check on that history, but you could get something that would even provide some comfort and some pleasure. And Jesus is saying, look, it's for your own good. You're going to save up, and you're going to, something that is prone to something as small and little as a moth can destroy it. Mildew, rust. And often what they would do, they didn't have banks back then, so they would get their money, they would hide it in the floorboard or put it in like a little lockbox so recon thieves could come in, so they would know that there would be money in there. And so Jesus is saying, for your own good. And so, treasures. Store up your treasures. Who is the treasure? The treasure is Christ. And the treasures that we store up is following Him. So let me just give you a quick example, because we just came out of VBS. One way to treasure, to know that your treasure is being stored up in heaven, is that you are praying, God, save these kids. Work in their lives. That you're serious. You're spending time, and you're pleading with God to work in these kids' lives. You're storing up treasures. Because Jesus is the treasure. So let me ask you something here. So do you spend too much? And if you do, what do you spend too much on? And isn't it kind of crazy that in particular in our kind of where we live, you can almost buy anything and justify it. Well, you know what? I mean, right? And so where do you spend too much? If you don't know, ask your spouse. When you, like during the whole quarantine thing, when did you feel that like sense of, okay, I'm going to be okay now, I'm excited now, I finally got excited. When do you feel that? When do you feel that rush? I mean, we live in an area that has counseling for people who shop too much. We have shows called Hoarders. That's nuts. Follow the money, you find your treasure. And so let me ask, Colossians 2, verses 2 through 3, eyes on heaven. Philippians 3:8, that Jesus is the ultimate treasure. I count everything a loss. I count everything lost. That's how you know where your treasure is. Follow the money. And you don't have to be, we're not saying, if you're really wealthy or if you're really, no. Follow the money and what your possessions are and what you buy. So let me ask you this. How many of you, before, let's use car. How many of you would have somebody in this church or a godly mentor that you can sit down and say, do you really think I need this car? What do you think about me spending so much money on this car? And what if they were to say, I don't think you need a heated steering wheel. Now, if you have a heated steering wheel, don't get rid of your car. That's not part of the application. And if you do, give it to me at a very, very reasonable rate. But you see what I'm saying? We don't talk. We don't really talk about it. It seems really intimate. Like, why are you telling me what car I can and can't buy? But do we talk like that? And here's maybe the reason why. It's because we don't want to know. We don't want to know. Let me say, where do we start then? Let's do a little application here. We'll jump to the next point. The next 2 points will be quicker. Where do we start? We need to phone the Dave Ramsey show. Right away. Right after this, the application is you get on the phone and you call old Dave. Or go through Financial Peace University. That's not the application at all. Here it is. We need to learn to be students of the Bible. That when we study the Bible, whether we're studying David and Goliath or Colossians, that we don't say, well, this is what I feel. Or this is what I think it means. We need to study the Word of God, come to the end of what we're studying and say, how does this move me to treasure Christ more? And answer that question. We read David and Goliath. We say, how does that move me? How does that push me to treasure Christ more? And then in our prayer life, we need to learn to pray that way. We need to learn to pray treasure. It's not that a Christian is not after gain or after treasure. It's that we're after gain and we're after treasure, and we find all of that in Jesus. And so we begin to pray, God, would you help me to treasure you? Help me to be satisfied in you. Help me to think on you. Help me not to waste time skimming through of what I can and can't buy, or just, I've got some free time, so I'll go shopping on them. Help me to relish the things of Christ and not use my money to buy idols. And so then, as long as you fight for those things, go ahead and call Dave. Go ahead and give him a call, see what he thinks about your budget and how you're spending your money. But if we're not understanding how to study the Word of God, and we're not understanding how to pray, it doesn't matter. And let me do this from last week. We talked the Lord's Prayer. And so, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, and thy will be done. That was little King Jimmy for you, okay? Your will, your kingdom, okay? And so, what are those? Those are treasure principles. You're praying, God, I want to treasure who you are. And I want to treasure your kingdom. I want that to change my heart. And I want to treasure your will, not mine or what I want. You are learning to pray treasure principles. And then if you want, you can call Dave Ramsey. And what we're doing is what the church fathers, particularly Augustine, would call, when we understand the gospel, we begin to reorder. This is really important. Somebody should resurrect this idea. Reorder our loves. We only reorder our loves when we understand the gospel and that Jesus Christ is the supreme treasure. That is, the Bible doesn't say stay away from money, it's evil. It doesn't say that. It says it can be. It says make sure you don't want to be rich. Don't pursue that. Keep yourself from the love of money. It says all those things, but it doesn't say, look, if you make 6 figures, you're likely going to hell. It doesn't say that. It says it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, but it doesn't condemn money. It condemns it being your treasure. That's what it condemns. And so the gospel reorders our love. Jesus wants your heart because he wants all of you. And our hearts truly do desire something that will last. Something that will last. Something that we don't have to replace. Something that we can trust in. Something that we can lean into, that we can depend on. We call that worship, by the way. So let me just give you one other quick story, and then we'll move on. So during quarantine, I would never admit this to anybody, so don't tell them. During quarantine, I was recording the messages on my phone, and I had this iPhone that was brought over on the Mayflower, and I would get into my sermon. I would just get going and fist pumping, and I would get excited, and my phone would stop and say data full, storage full. So I would get in there and I would delete that thing and I would start again, and I would there were times it would take me over 5 hours to record a sermon because I would delete everything off of my phone. Everything was off my phone. We'll just do there was some sin happening, y'all. Okay? So here I am preaching, trying to preach the gospel, and I'm throwing my phone and calling it names. I'm yelling at my phone, hateful things. And I began to think this: if I could just get a new iPhone with more storage, this wouldn't have happened. Lie. I did get a new phone, has more storage, and it hasn't happened since. All that did was reveal what is my solution to my anger towards devices. What is my anger towards and frustration and just unkind things and sinful things coming out. What was my answer? The gospel or get a new phone? Follow the money, you'll find your treasure. You can do that. You can do that with so many things. Let's keep going. Then he comes to this eye thing where the eye is the lamp of the body, and if your eye is healthy, what in the world is he talking about? That's sort of confusing. If your eye is bad, the whole body is full. Here's what he's saying. Notice there are two treasures, and there are two eyes. One eye is good, one eye is bad. And the reason why I think Jesus is doing this is because he's saying there's a singular focus here. There's a singular focus that needs to happen in our lives. And if your eye is dark, you don't have wisdom. You can't decide, I'm going to take this job, or I'll go here, or I'll spend my money this way, or when I go through Amazon, I can see what would be without light. Your eye is dark. You can't tell that. Your treasures are so rooted into your heart that possessions and money are so rooted into your heart, you can't even see what you're doing. And just like the heart affects the whole body, if your eye is full of darkness, you can't tell where you're going. You don't know what you're doing. And here's the scary thing, that we are in charge of our children. And if our eyes are darkened, and we can't see what to do with money and possessions, and in our home there's tension about money and possessions, what do you think your kids are picking up on? You're leading your kids about money and possessions and treasure with a darkened eye. God help us. Here's the other, and I really appreciate, to quote him again, I really appreciate Tim Keller when it comes to this section. Because he says this. He says, one of the things that he thinks that Jesus is talking about, the eye being darkened, is that nobody believes they have a greed problem. He goes on to say, talking about Jesus and adultery, he says, nobody questions adultery. It's like, yes, that's odd. There's another, but greed is something odd. And are you greedy? Compared to what? Compared to who? Especially in our economy. And it's hard to figure out, are you really greedy? Do you really strive for possession? Is your treasure really Christ, or is it possessions and money? And so it's really difficult. And the reason why it's really difficult for you and I to see if we're greedy is because our eyes are dark. And we can't really see what wisdom is. I mean, credit card companies are genius, aren't they? You don't have to have paper. You just swipe. You don't even really have to pay attention to the price. Now you can scan, and now it's on your iPhone. So all you have to do is, I don't really know how to do this. There's a reason, trying to avoid temptation, but you could do something with your iPhone where you just put your iPhone in front of the thing and you pay for it. You don't have to look at the price. You don't have to think, because your eyes darken. I mean, Amazon just added a few months ago, to my knowledge, this button that, you know what? I don't want to tempt you. But just trust me, they've added something that makes it easier to buy. And every sin he enthrones divine wisdom, says Tripp, and enthrones human wisdom. And your human wisdom and my human wisdom is darkness. So why we take certain jobs, why we work so hard, because we want a good life. And then here's what's really scary. I'm going to go back to the kids. I'll just give you a few. What are you teaching your kids about possessions and money? I remember very well seeing this as a young teenager. We would have a big youth group, and I remember I would see it about 14 or 15 commitments to youth groups started to change drastically because they had to save up for a car. They had to get that car. They had to get the car they wanted. We talked about this several weeks ago, I think. And then once they got that car, we just didn't see them again. And you might say, well, Jeremy was super holy. He didn't. No, I'm just too lazy. But some of these people, I mean, why do you want your kids to get a job? Why do you want them to have a big savings account? Is it possible that if your eye is darkened as a parent and you want them to have a better life than you, or to have security, or to have possessions, so that, why do you want them to get an education? Look at kids' birthday parties. Are we possibly training our kids to live a life of having a darkened eye by all the toys that you get them and all the stuff? And I'm not saying that you are. If you want to buy the newest Mighty Paw Patrol Pups thing, go for it. But think clearly. Am I training my child even at this age? Because it's not going to go away. They're going to have a whole playroom full of toys. And then as they get older, you think they're going to say, you know what? I think I had too much growing up. I think I don't want that new device. I don't want that kind of. No, you're training them now, and you're training them. God help us with a darkened eye. And so, let's do a few examples, and then I promise we'll keep going. The eye is understanding and wisdom, and there was nobody wiser than Solomon. Right? In fact, Solomon was wiser than all of us put together. And he was so wise that when he was praying, he asked God for wisdom. And yet when he got the possessions, it destroyed him. If Solomon's eye was so darkened, and he was the wisest man in the world, you think you can handle it? You want to keep going? Let's keep going with... okay, let's go Judas. Judas is hanging out for almost 3 years with the God of all creation, God the Son. We're talking feet away. I don't know if they had feet back then. But right there with Jesus, sitting around campfires at night, listening to the parables. And what brought down Judas's heart? Money. And so, really, you think that we can handle it? You don't think we have a greed problem? Okay, maybe not. I just look at Solomon and I think of my own heart. I look at Judas and I think of my own heart and go, man, if they did. And then you think of all of Jesus' parables. What was the issue with the prodigal kid? We looked at that today in Sunday school. Money, possessions. He wanted it now. And it fractures wisdom. It fractures relationships. Look what it did with not just with the prodigal child, but with Judas. And right about now, cue up Cats in the Cradle. Because that's what's happening. Some of you guys are way too young to know Cats in the Cradle. I'm disappointed. All right, so what about Demas? Hung out with the Apostle Paul. Demas hung out with the Apostle Paul. And you and I think, man, if I could just see some of the healing or see God work, like Demas hung out with the Apostle Paul. And then towards the end of 2 Timothy, in chapter 4, he talks so highly of Demas, didn't he? Throughout the other epistles, Paul talks pretty highly of Demas. And he says, Demas, because he loved the world, has deserted me. You can desert him for possessions or money. What if you got a $10 an hour raise, and yet you had to work Sunday morning? What would you do? Could you really give that up? One of my favorite movies. It is because I'm a pastor. It's really theological. But Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is this such a good movie. And there's this end scene where his would-be love interest, Indiana Jones, our hero, there's the scene at the end when one of the cups, one of the golden cups, remember this? One of the treasures falls down the pit and it lands on the edge. and she falls because of the earthquake. And Indiana Jones, like Indiana Jones does, you know what a great guy, grabs her hand. It's going to save her. And she's reaching for the treasure. Do you remember this scene? And he looks at her and he says, Elsa, I can't hold you. You've got to give me your other hand. And she reaches even more for the treasure. And he says, I can't hold you. And she falls to her death. And that is this picture of eyes darkened. You crush your family, you will crush relationships, you will crush them, you will distance yourself. Marriage is in because of money. Marriage is in because of possessions. Kids are lost and wayward because of the way that we have walked around with darkened eyes. Let's go to the final and what money demands, and you see what money demands. Money demands slavery. It demands your service. And if we are foolish enough to think that we can get in bed with two, you're foolish. You cannot serve God and money. The idea of money there, some of your translations, you look at some of your translations are different. The idea is possessions and wealth. You cannot. You cannot serve it because you'll end up gravitating towards one and loving the other. Have you seen this? Where the $10 an hour raise, I don't know who's giving $10 an hour raises, by the way, but let me find out who that is. But that $10 an hour raise, you have to work on Sundays, and you think, okay, just every other Sunday. And then what happens? You can't serve both. And soon it's a month goes by, and then it's 2 months, and then that person shows up. And then they decide, look, I'm going to work really hard so that for retirement I can really serve the church. I mean, haven't you seen stuff like this? Why? Because follow the money. And it's dangerous. Money will demand you to serve it, to follow it, and there is no spiritual polygamy in following Christ. We have often talked about this idea of, well, there's the secular, and then there's what am I looking for? The holy, or the secular and the holy, right? I don't see that. You don't work at Honda, that's secular, and I come to church and that's holy. That's not what he's saying here. It's not what he's saying at all. You can't serve two. So why do you want more money? Why do you want the possessions? When you buy a car, there should be a war inside you. When you do something with your house, when you spend money, there should be this war inside of you. I remember at a young age, my grandma Fern, God bless her, she has broke, but she would give me $10. Every once in a while, she'd give me $10. And I was a new Christian, and when I would get that $10, there was a war that happened in me. I remember because I thought, do I have to give any of this to the church? Do I have to give maybe $1? But I'm a poor college kid, man. I want to go out to eat. Taco Bell, you can get a bunch of tacos for that. I remember that war. There ought to be that. And what I've tried to do is numb that war. Because it's uncomfortable. But that war needs to remain. That war needs to stay there. You love one and hate the other. Let's talk about love for a minute. Love is not like, love is not sentimentality. Love is not emotional. A book by Jacques Ellul, he wrote a book called Money and Power. Don't read it, it's not that great a book. But in it, he says this. Love is binding. And when you love something, you bind yourself to that which you love's fate. And when you bind yourself to money and possessions and earning money and teaching your kids how to have a big savings account, and when you're teaching your kids and teaching one another how to bind yourself to possessions and money, moth is going to come in and ruin. You're sealing your fate. And when you bind yourself to Christ, to the love of Christ, to the treasure of Christ, you bind yourself, the Bible calls it united with Christ to his life, death, burial, and resurrection, and even his suffering, and in all of that he is treasured high. And so, we want to look at what we're binding ourselves to. Let me read. Two treasures, two visions, and two masters. Is it possible your treasure's in the wrong spot? Is it possible your eyes are dark? Is it possible that you're trying to serve two? You're teaching your kids to do all the same thing. They're following you. They know their tension. They know what your expectations are, even if you don't say it. Again, I heard Keller reference this quote by author and speaker David Foster Wallace, who's not a Christian. I've read this before. Sit back and just follow this, because I think this is a really good quote from somebody who does not claim Christ. Because here's something else that's weird but true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what we worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing the sort of God or spiritual type thing is to worship. Be it Jesus Christ, Allah, Yahweh, Wiccan, Mother, Goddess, Four Noble Truths. I told you he's not a believer. We worship that thing because anything else will eat you alive. Now, listen closely. Tune your ears in. If you worship money and things, if they are the tap to real meaning in life for you, then you will never have enough. You will never feel you have enough. This is the truth. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure. You will always feel ugly, and when the time of age starts showing, you will die a million deaths, and then finally it will grieve you. On one level, we already know this stuff. That's what he says. We already know this stuff. It's been codified as myths, proverbs, cliches, epigrams, parables. They're the skeleton of every great story. The whole trick is to keep that truth in front of our everyday life. And so, what we need to do is understand is to reorder our loves. How do we know our treasure? Follow the money. And here's what does it. You don't walk out of here today thinking, okay, I need to stop this, I need to stop this, I need to not do this, and I need to call Dave Ramsey. What we have got to understand is that we treasure Jesus Christ because he first treasured us. That in Jesus Christ, he left the treasure. That's what Philippians 2 says. He left the glories of heaven. He left his treasure. He left what he had. And that on the cross, he would permanently lose all of his treasure. That he would lose all of his treasure. He would lose everything. He would suffer as those whose treasure was in the wrong place, whose eye was darkened, and who worship and serve money rather than the Creator. He would suffer under the penalty. He would pay, and he would be crushed under the Father's wrath and suffer hell in our place. Why? To get a treasure that he didn't have. He lost it all to get a treasure that he didn't have. And that treasure is the church. And it's bought by his cross. You are the treasure of Christ. And when we can understand that, when we can wrap our hearts and our affections around the fact that God himself treasures us, you of all people, it'll change your philosophy on why you have a job and why you work. It'll change the way you train your kids. Why? Because Christ is treasured above all. And money just becomes money. Possessions just become possessions. And here's what happens. You become radically generous. Radically generous. Not, Grandma gave me $10, I guess I'll give $1. But I got $10, I wonder if I can give $11. Radically generous when Jesus Christ is your ultimate treasure. Because he treasured you. Because he treasured you. Let's pray. Father, we confess to you in a world where possessions change value, where money changes and there's inflation and the cost of living goes up and we never quite get a handle on all this. You're the constant, and I pray that we would understand that we treasure Christ because he first treasured us. And I pray that we be honest about our money, honest about our possessions. Jesus, thank you that you are the ultimate servant. Thank you that you are the light of the world, and because of you we can serve you and walk in the light as you were in the light. And because of you, we are free to treasure what is good and true, and that is Christ. I pray that this would be true in our lives. For the sake of our joy, the sake of the gospel, and the sake of God's glory,